you, Mr. Silverstein. That's all we have for public comment. So we'll open it up to the board for discussion.
I had a comment. I just want to compliment my members who've been working on this for having really good timing, you know, the getting international funding first before it disappeared. And then turning to the state, which has actually additional resources available. Real smart move. And it makes me want to recommend that you move as fast as you can forward. While that state funding is still potentially available for further stages of the project. I just think the faster it moves at this point, the better off you'll be in terms of being actually able to accomplish the project. That's all.
Morgan, I think you've got a comment.
So I support the plan, and I think it's good to continue to move forward with next steps. Kind of echoing Board Member Williams's comments, I think it'd be good to keep moving, and I think this is a priority for investment. So any funding that can be used to continue to move it through the process to ultimately get to construction would be a great amenity for the residents of this city. This is what I thought of when I first thought of resiliency, is projects like this that have kind of multi-use. I was also encouraged when you talked about the potential for an expanded detention basin. I think that has environmental and stormwater benefits at one of the sites. I know it's lower priority, but I think that's important. Just a couple comments on La Jolla Shores. I mean, I've been driving and parking to La Jolla Shores since I've had a license and since before. But well, I wasn't driving. But it was one of the first places I went when I was 16 and driving in there. So I think access is important, but I also think we need to acknowledge that it's some of the most valuable real estate in the country. And so what is the best thing for the citizens and residents of the area? I think more work needs to be done, and I think I heard you say that more work would be done with outreach and design for that, but I think there's pros and cons there. And I think if our committee has a role in that, I think it could be helpful, because if we were to make a decision on what the best design would be, I think we'd want to hear more directly from some of the residents on what are exactly their concerns and everything there. I think you have two options there, so I think I'd be comfortable still moving it forward, but just a couple comments on that.
I had a couple questions. The recommended sites that we're talking about today to not include La Jolla, right? It's Mission Beach, Ocean Beach, Sunset.
That's correct. For the Hoya Shores, we are recommending that additional community engagement take place before the project site moves forward. Project site in general, that doesn't necessarily mean one of our proposed designs, but recognizing that we've heard a lot of differing perspectives on what community members wanted to see at the site. So that additional engagement needs to take place before that moves forward. Tourmaline Beach is also not one of the prioritized to move forward at this time.
And what does that mean for process after soliciting, gathering additional community feedback?
For the Hoya Shores?
For La Jolla Shores in terms of city approval?
We would need to have additional funding to then move the project design forward. If we were to get to a place with community and stakeholders that we agreed on a project design, we would then need to get additional funding to move that project design forward, because we don't currently have that.
And then for funding for the other three sites, I mean, are we baking in any kind of maintenance of effort?
The funding that we have currently today brings the sites forward to 15% design, completes additional technical studies that will inform that project design, includes additional community and stakeholder engagement and additional environmental analysis. The city would need to seek funding to complete the engineering design and to actually construct the design, and then ongoing maintenance and monitoring with all of that.
Okay, so it would be baked into future funding pursuits?
Yeah.
Okay. I just think what happened with the Cardiff, their living shoreline, and how that it worked, right? But now it has to be rebuilt after those storms. So just think ahead.
One question that I maybe should have asked earlier, clarifying question about the dunes in each of these, especially the Ocean Beach and the Sunset, or the Ocean Beach and Mission Beach. I know the city already spends a bunch of staff time and a bunch of money making winter berms, like you mentioned. Do you know if this will replace that?
That is the
action?
intent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it'll serve the same purpose but be permanent.
Yes, so currently our park and recreation staff has to go out every winter and create winter berms in Ocean Beach and Mission Beach to provide that flood resilience protection. You need to take heavy machinery out into the beach, it's staff time, it's a cost. And so the intent is that these project designs, were they be implemented, would replace that winter berm program.
They do it along a lot of Mission Beach too, and I know it takes a bunch of time because nothing else happens on the beach in April. When they're doing or undoing that, so I know it's a lot of work. I would just encourage the next phase of this to quantify how much the savings would be for staff time and use of the sand, purchase of the sand, whatever, versus a one-time dune restoration. Hopefully that's helpful in the long-term thinking of things. And then the other question I had was, I think along the lines of what Stan said, and I think what Eric intimated was that the San Diego Union Tribune wrote an article, I think it was David Garrick, about how city of San Diego stacks up against other big cities in California in terms of grants that we get. And we are surprised lower than other cities, and in particular, that it was a city audit that he was reporting on. So the city audit also calls out that we are particularly bad in getting match funding for infrastructure projects. So do we, I mean, I would call this an infrastructure project, really. And is in the next phase 2, are you thinking, do you have any specific thoughts about how to quantify or where to get the match needed to be more more competitive in Prop 4 or wherever it is it might go? Where is the match from, and what can the Resiliency Advisory Board do to make sure that that match is spoken for, reserved, trumpeted as much as possible for these kinds of projects?
It's a good question. So for future funding, we haven't identified what exactly those specific grants are. That will come after the plan moves through city council. We know that there's a lot of funding available and various pots of funding that these projects would be eligible for, some of which require match, some which don't. We do have dedicated grant staff across the city that are really looking at coordinating across all the various city departments that need to engage to move these projects forward, and helping to identify and be successful in acquiring those grants. And that has been really successful so far in trying to address getting more of that money to the city.
Yes.
Been thinking a lot. Anyway, I want to applaud the work that's been done so far. I think you guys have just been really doing an awesome job, and I agree with the prioritization. And I think before we start the discussion part, I'd like to request that someone reread the specific recommendations on which you want us to, if we're voting recommendations, I'd like to hear what those are again before we start. I also want to applaud this discussion about grant funding and ask a question, maybe not for today, but for the recommendations going forward. Is that thinking about the balance of money needed to not just complete the studies, but actually build the projects. And at what point is there, if there is, I'm ignorant about this, any expectation that the city is putting its own money in? At what point does that kick in? I mean, are we expecting that 100% of the design work is going to be done with outside funding? Does the city come up with some budget funds for either completion of design and or construction project? Is that going to be externally funded? I don't understand how we see these projects through to completion.
In terms of funding for getting the projects built, we are looking to maximize external grant dollars to the extent that we can, particularly when we know that there is a lot of funding that is coming down from the state for climate adaptation. We want to bring as much of that funding to San Diego as we can. So grant funding is really our priority. As the projects are completed and constructed, there will need to be staff time and resources that are dedicated to monitoring and maintaining those sites. And that cost, we haven't determined at this point where that funding will come from.
That's time replacing, maintaining winter berms, I suppose.
Yeah.
Can you trade costs on this?
Net costs.
Any other questions or discussion? I believe that the action is the recommendation. This could be recommended for the, are you looking for a breakdown or recommendation of the entire plan?
The board is flexible in terms of what you can provide as your recommendation that will move forward. As the item moves to environment committee, city staff is proposing those 3 sites, so the Ocean Beach, Dog Beach and Ocean Beach Pier sites bundled together. For the CIP as well as Sunset Cliffs and Mission Beach. So you could support that recommendation, you could determine which projects of the Ocean Beach, Dog Beach and Mission Beach sites that you wanted to see, as there were 2 project options. So for Mission Beach, it was the dune and then the dune with the perch beach. For Ocean Beach, there was the option to relocate the bathroom and to add the transit stop on. Your recommendation could also be overall in support or in opposition to the plan or components of the plan. It can include other facets such as continued community engagement, stakeholder engagement. It's really fairly flexible depending on what the board wants to provide.
Open for additional discussion unless anyone has a motion ready to go.
I have one, just discussion amongst the board. The Ocean Beach and the Mission Beach proposals, I appreciate that they have options and that they were organized with some menu items. I think that the 2, the Perch Beach and Mission Beach, and that the relocation of the restroom at Dog Beach do protect that infrastructure better and do offer, even at higher tides, even at sea level rise, more access to the beach. And those seem like better options to me. I don't really know whether it's a good idea for us to pick, or I mean, I think it's a good idea for us to say we like these options in particular, but I'm sure that it's something that the city council and the environment committee will also speak about, so.
You can still recommend it.
Yeah, so I was realizing that as I was saying it out. Yeah.
And I would just pick up on that, and you said it better than I could because you were specific about it, but in terms of a general guidance, I also would personally support the options that are more resilient, that is to say, better protect the beaches, not just the land, in the sense of maintaining the beach under the conditions that we expect the future to provide. More resilience is to be supported.
Yes.
I would maybe recommend, I feel like during this discussion, a few things were thrown out, like about a project that happened in Cardiff and IB and some others that protected or attempted to protect and then I'm sure there's other projects across the country to protect shoreline and make things more resilient. Just, referencing past projects to establish some precedent for this working, or if it didn't work and what you're attempting to do differently, I think would provide some people some confidence about your having done the research and that you're doing things differently if necessary, or mimicking the things that did work. Reference points, I think, could be powerful.
Thoughts?
I'm in general support of the master plan. I think it's really well done. I'll echo Erica's thoughts. I do believe that the more resilient options are more favorable. And
Take a motion on that.
okay. I'll move to make statement of general support to the coastal resilience master plan with preference to the more resilient options provided for Mission Beach and for Ocean Beach.
Those specifically are in general. Those are the two.
Yeah, those are the two with different options. I guess in general, the more resilient options.
Second.
I'll second.
So,
First then.
well, I guess I look for clarification. Are we just voicing general support or should we make a formal recommendation to the city council to adopt the coastal resiliency plan, certify the EIR and prioritize those programs?
What would be a recommendation? Amendment?
I mean, I'd suggest a friendly amendment if that were.
Or you can just amend it directly.
I can just amend it directly. Okay, I would suggest an amendment just with that clarifying language that we are recommending that the city council adopt the resiliency master plan, certify the program EIR, create the capital improvement projects for Mission Beach, Ocean Beach. And prioritize the resiliency options.
Second.
Right,
Is that just the original proposer accepting?
well, we would have to vote on the amendment and then we'll go back to the main motion.
Yeah.
Any discussion on the? Yes.
Can I offer a friendly amendment?
Friendly amendment?
Just to say that the more resilient options, I think that resiliency could be defined in a bunch of different ways, so. I would like to say that the more resilient options are the Perch Beach option at Mission Beach. And the resilient relocation is the slide title at Ocean Beach that moves the restroom from a coastal to a more park setting. I think that's what we're all saying, but those, I think we should specify
Yeah.
those two
Alderman.
options.
It's a clarification of.
I would call that a clarification of my.
Good clarification there.
Can I clarify that you are also recommending Sunset Cliffs move forward with that?
Yes.
Yes.
So we have a motion.
I think mine would be a motion to amend Abel's motion.
Does Kelly want to jump in?
May I ask, hi, I'm sorry, I'm Kelly Stonko, I'm the Deputy Director of the Environmental Policy and Public Spaces Division. I just, for my clarification, is the Resiliency Advisory Board looking to adopt the staff recommendation with an added statement that with all options, you prefer the most resilient option? Is that kind of where I hear the board going, or am I misunderstanding the motion?
Well, that's why I asked for a rereading of whatever that language was, so that we would be informed by that in this discussion.
I think just say staff's recommendation and with the recommendations for the resilient option specified at Mission Beach and Ocean Beach. That's all you have to do.
Hopefully there's a second hand amendment.
I do believe Stan seconded
Oh,
it,
that's right.
but I mean, I was reading the staff recommendation, so that was my
Right.
intent.
Right.
So recommends staff recommendation with prioritization of the Perch Beach option at Mission Beach and what is the one called?
Resilient relocation for Ocean Beach.
Right, Jim?
Yes.
Any other discussion? Right, so let's take a vote first on the amendment. All in favor? Opposed? Right, so the amendment passes and we go back to the main motion as amended. Any more discussion on that?
Can we have it reread?
Absolutely.
We did a tough job.
Okay, so the amended motion is that the Resiliency Advisory Board is recommending that the city adopt the staff recommendation for all three projects, prioritizing Perch Beach option at Mission Beach and the resilient relocation at Dog Beach.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other discussion? I'll take a vote on it. All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes and adopted. Thank you all. Thanks to the staff for coming in force.
Hey, good job.
Okay,
So the amended or the modified agenda, we're headed to item 9C, which is hazard mitigation planning with the city planning department to present on that topic, including SB 99 and AB 747.
you want the word or you want the speech mark? I thought just the word. Okay. Let me.
Double click my. I mean, there's.
Yeah. Okay, then you should be all set. Let me see my chance to you guys.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having us today and for this opportunity to meet with all of you. I'm Sean McGee. I'm a principal planner on the community planning team with the City of San Diego City Planning Department. And I'm joined by Suji Lucas, senior planner on the community planning team. Today, we're going to provide an update on how the City of San Diego is addressing compliance with SB 99 and AB 747. We'll cover some of the recent updates to our general plan, collaboration with CAL FIRE, and our next steps in hazard mapping and fire safety planning with regard to the general plan. Next slide. Perfect. The City of San Diego's general plan serves as the city's constitution for development. It's comprised of 11 elements that provide a comprehensive slate of citywide policies that further our City of Village's smart growth strategy for development. It integrates hazard mapping and mitigation strategies to enhance public safety and points toward other guiding policies and codes within the city that address fire safety. Next slide. Community plans work together with the general plan to provide location-based policies and recommendations in the city's community planning areas. Community plans are written to refine the general plan's citywide policies, designate land uses and housing densities, and provide additional site-specific recommendations as needed. Each community has its own plan, providing localized guidance while aligning with broader city goals. These plans are consistent with the general plan and provide guidance for how development comes forward in the future. It is implemented through both zoning and our land development code. Next slide. As new development is proposed, they undergo thorough fire safety evaluations to ensure proper access and emergency response readiness. The fire rescue department plays a role in this review process when new subdivisions are proposed. They also thoroughly are reviewed by the fire rescue department. The city of San Diego is largely built out, so new subdivisions occur infrequently across the city. But the fire rescue department review ensures adequate fire access and project reviews to reduce and mitigate risks in high hazard areas. Fire rescue department review ensures adequate ingress and egress for new subdivisions as well. Next slide. So our general plan was comprehensively updated by a unanimous vote of the City Council in 2008, and then it was amended in 2024 to align with the city's adopted climate action plan, as well as the goals, policies, and discussion that support the city's objectives for climate action, fair housing, and equity. As part of the 2024 update, we have been proactive in updating our general plan to meet safety requirements. Pursuant to recent California legislation, namely Assembly Bill 747 and Senate Bill 99, local agencies must review accessibility and evacuation routes wherever or whenever designated elements within the general plan or other emergency planning documents are completed or updated. As part of our 2024 general plan update process, we collaborated and consulted with CAL FIRE to ensure our safety element of the general plan remains compliant and effective. Even after adoption of the 2024 update, we have continued consultation with CAL FIRE regarding our safety elements. As many of you may be aware, late last month, CAL FIRE released the updated fire hazard severity zone maps for Southern California, including San Diego. And we are incorporating the latest very high fire hazard severity zone maps into our planning efforts, including updating our very high fire severity zone maps in the general plan, and using this to help inform our mapping requirements to meet the requirements of SB 99. A primary priority of this effort, and this mapping effort in particular, is mapping high-risk areas in the city with fewer than 2 evacuation routes. And as of now, all other components of SB 99 have been addressed by our general plan update and identified by CAL FIRE. Our partnership with CAL FIRE remains strong as they review and validate our general plan. Next slide. So SB 99 requires cities to review and update their general plan safety element to include information identifying residential developments in hazard areas that do not have at least 2 emergency evacuation routes. As part of the general plan update in 2024, we included an emergency evacuations procedure section to the general plan to help meet the requirements of SB 99, as well as AB 747. So in our updated element, we described how the city identifies properties that do not have access to 2 evacuation routes. And this section in particular describes what an evacuation route is and what happens when an emergency evacuation is necessary. Our description of constrained parcels also helps meet the requirements of SB 99. We define these properties as constrained parcels, and this section describes the process for determining what properties are constrained. This term was also added to the glossary of our general plan. Constrained parcels identification also occurs every 5 years by the Fire Rescue Department in accordance with AB 2911, which I believe you may have heard about last month. It occurs in coordination with the California Board of Forestry and Fire Protection. And this process includes performing a survey of subdivisions with more than 30 dwelling units located in either a state responsibility area or local responsibility area, very high fire hazard severity zones without secondary egress routes that are at significant fire risk. A constrained parcel includes a residential development within a hazard area that does not have at least 2 emergency evacuation routes, which could in turn affect the ability of emergency personnel to access an area and to evacuate community members safely and efficiently in the event of an emergency. The 2024 general plan update included policy language that requires the identification of existing areas that have inadequate access for fire apparatus vehicles and evacuation routes. And as of right now, we are specifically coordinating with CAL FIRE to identify residential areas that do not have 2 or more access routes available and are subject to hazard risks. Next slide. AB 747 requires cities and counties in the safety element of the general plan to identify evacuation routes, their capacity, safety, and viability under a range of emergency scenarios. A jurisdiction that has adopted a local hazard mitigation plan, emergency operations plan, or other document that fulfills these objectives can use that information in the safety element to comply with the requirements of AB 747. By summarizing and incorporating by reference those other plans or documents into the safety element. The city participates in the San Diego County's multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan, which generally fulfills the requirements of AB 747. AB 747 requires the safety element to summarize and reference this plan to fulfill the requirements of the law. Section D in our general plan safety element on hazard mitigation and emergency preparedness plans was amended to help illustrate that the city already meets the requirements of AB 747. And San Diego County's multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan is briefly summarized and incorporated by reference. Section P of the safety element, hazard mitigation and disaster preparedness, was also amended to help illustrate that the city already meets the requirements of AB 747. And San Diego County's multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan is again summarized in more detail and incorporated by reference into that section as well. Our updated safety element includes information on emergency evacuation procedures and references the city's emergency operations plan, the San Diego Police Department policy and procedures, operational area emergency plan, and the California Master Mutual Aid Agreement. Next slide. With regard to next steps, we are finalizing hazard mapping to ensure comprehensive coverage of high-risk areas, and we are going to continue working internally to determine the best way to analyze our road network to exclude small cul-de-sacs and determine residential properties that really lack ingress and egress to meet the intent of SB 99, and we will continue to coordinate with CAL FIRE on this effort. The hazards we intend to look at include coastal storm and erosion, sea level rise and coastal flooding, dam failure, earthquake hazard, 105-year flood, high and moderate risk landslide, tsunami risks, and high and very high wildfire. CAL FIRE will review our work before we present it to City Council for adoption. And looking ahead, our general plan will continue evolving with updates in 2026. Ongoing coordination with the Fire Rescue Department will occur on all planning efforts. Next slide. In summary, our planning efforts align with the state mandates while prioritizing community safety, and our ongoing collaboration with CAL FIRE ensures a proactive approach to fire hazard mitigation and hazard mitigation. Thank you, and I am happy to take any questions.
Yes.
Sure. Hi, Sean.
Okay.
Would you go back to your next steps? Slide?
So pause, let's do clarifying questions again, and then just double check for any public comment on the Zoom.
My question is there any timeline associated with these steps?
We would be looking forward to having this completed in 2026.
By 20?
By 2026.
Good, thanks.
So just to clarify my understanding, there was an amendment to the safety element in 2024. It did not include the finalized mapping for SB 99, and there's additional work to be done, and that will be included in your amendments. Will it be a safety element amendment again in 2026?
Correct.
Okay, I guess the ask would be if that could come back before this board. And then slightly related, I did want to thank Julia. We got right after the last meeting the map that showed the overlap of the 2011 communities with the disadvantaged communities. So I thought that was very helpful.
So if I understand it, there are a bunch of these mapping exercises that are going on with the intention of having everything wrapped up in 2026. The specific piece of addressing, residential developments that lack two emergency evacuation routes. Will they not find out until 2026? Is there any intermittent deadline by which that will be done that people will be informed?
I don't have that information available just yet, but I'm happy to work with Julia to provide that to you.
That's a good question.
Question? Check on the Zoom. Switch around. I don't think so.
Is there any public comment from the virtual attendees? Raise your hand or unmute. There's not. Any public comment from the person? Okay. Continue with your questions and discussion.
So I know this isn't the exact thrust of what you're presenting on, but can you explain to me the way, the feedback loops that the city has in order to avoid building in high fire, in unsafe fire zones, very high fire safety zones? There's zoning. But as these maps get updated and the city understands climate risk and hazard better, what is the, aside from being safe when it happens, what is the way that the city thinks about and plans for avoiding these kinds of situations, I guess? I know that's might be a big question.
Yeah, it's a big question. I think the key component of the maps and specifically with regards to updates to our general plan is like providing awareness and a reference point. I think that having our mapping updated is the goal is to provide as much information as possible. I think perhaps maybe it would be good to consult with other departments as well to sort of answer that question better. I don't know if that really gets to the point you were.
I can add a bit there too. So the very high fire hazard severity zone doesn't preclude any development occurring within it, but it does require additional requirements for hardening of buildings if you are within that very high fire hazard severity zone.
It just an observation, that's what we heard last meeting, does not cover ADUs. So an ADU being built in these areas does not have to meet those additional.
It would still need to, I believe, meet the building code requirements. I think what was discussed last time was fire department is doing review of development within the very high fire hazard severity zones, and they do not always see all of the ADU permits.
That's the whole one.
And fire rescue department participates in the project review process as well.
I think we might have a public comment. Cynthia, if you want to call on.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Yes, Mike.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Yeah, just to comment here, I lived through the fire up in the Oakland Hills, resident up there, and saw what happened. Obviously, we all did, and was here in La Jolla Shores when just a small section of houses were told to evacuate. We were noticed, and you know, my experience is that people are totally reliant on cars to get out, and so rather than just think about this solution for cars and roads and lights, which if there's a region-wide event, there's nothing you're going to do, just absolutely zero that you're going to do. There's no road system that's going to support all the cars that flood. We, like I said, La Jolla Shores just had a little segment up on La Jolla Scenic, and that just absolutely stopped traffic because everybody jumped in their cars to get out. So I really want to encourage that you also identify ways via bike or on foot and include that in recommendations to people, to citizens in all these locales. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. I don't see anyone else. So, we'll see if there's any further discussion by the board.
I think I did.
Well, thank you both so much for the presentation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Right, so this relates to, goes very well with item 8B, which is selection of focus area for priority goal number 2 on community wildfire resilience. And last discussion talked about various options, everything from infill to ADUs to microgrids, I believe. So I don't know if the chair of that task of the former task force would like to lead us off.
Yeah, I can kick it off because I think it is a nice segue. Because we wanted to hear what was the city's plans for this option. I think my read, not to put words in the city's mouth, is they are still working on things related to implementation of those bills, which I think is good. I'm not really sure what else a role for us would be, other than maybe requesting when they are closer to implementation on those to come back before us and present more detail. I was just gonna read the comment. I still don't have a full grasp of exactly where all the future growth of the city is. It sounds like there's not very many subdivisions. But I don't necessarily think that's our role. I think some of that's the role of the planning commission and their advice to the city and implementation of their general plan. I think overall, the question to this group is for the wildfire resiliency goal, that we have, where do we want to focus? Do we want to focus on any more of this? Do we want to move on to the other categories, which were looking into the regulation framework for state wildfire, so looking at the more information on the mapping, the zone zero defensible space and homeowner information? Do we want to look at infrastructure in the built environment? Specifically, we had an option related to energy and grid resilience. Do we want to look at more natural landscape management? And I think it's up to the committee, sorry, the full board to speak to, do we want to select one of these and embark on more fact finding? Do we want to select a couple of these? Do we want to do something different for it? We sort of presented these as options coming out of the subcommittee. And then we did have one specifically as an option for community outreach for the sort of the 5 options we had put out there. I'd ask if it's okay with the chair, if Stan and Erica wanted to add anything to that coming out of the subcommittee.
Absolutely.
Oh, sure, thanks. You wanna go first, Erica?
No, go ahead.
I've been thinking about this stuff a lot over the past several months. Living in one of these high-risk areas and what I have to do to my home and all sort of things. So it's become personal. It's not just an abstract question anymore. I think going back to the presentation we just had to make this point. So they identified that the city is identifying these constrained parcels. And it's a process that they're going through. We've heard about other processes like, you know, what dwellings have been retrofitted to meet these new requirements. What it makes me think might be a potential role for this group is to come up with a set of monitoring metrics for this wildfire issue. In other words, to track, you know, what percent of the constrained areas have been inventoried. You know, how close are we completing that? What has happened in terms of outreach to the fire councils? How many have been, you know, contacted and brought into the process to know what they should be doing? I don't have a list in my head, so it seems to me there's a lot going on, but it's not being tracked in a systematic manner that I've seen. And maybe it's underneath the presentations, there's these methods.
Are all these things you're saying that we could track and basically hold accountable? Are these things the city you're saying has said that they want to do or that they're in the progress? These are things that,
Right.
okay,
From our
so it's just
presentation.
holding the city accountable for the things and tracking them. That's what you're proposing.
Yeah, as a way to assist
Yeah.
the officials
Yeah.
and the staff understand where we are in the process of getting any compliance with all those state requirements, for example. How many of those have we checked off? What's the status of those? I don't know if there's any current metrics being tracked in the resilience side that would fit into that category.
In terms of our compliance with state legislation?
Or what other activities would show up? Again, I don't think it's in the resilience plan stuff, probably doesn't have any yet. But I think there's a benefit on all these programs if there's a way that you can say we're making progress. You know we're making progress because we've had a report from the full grid group that they've added, you know, 20 new areas to the constrained parcel mapping system.
Are you talking about something like a dashboard?
Could be
Is
something
it
like
public
that.
facing or?
I was thinking more of just helping the elected officials particularly understand how well is the city of San Diego meeting the requirements that the state has set for these areas. And you know, how are we doing it in a way has outreach involved? What kind of outreach is going on, particularly to the communities that are disadvantaged? What I'm just throwing out for brainstorming, I don't have an answer, but it seems to me that would be something we could do that nobody else has said they're doing. You know, just doing that kind of dashboard or tracking system. So I just throw it out as a thought at this point. It seems like everything else we're talking about, we can learn, but we don't really contribute. So I've been trying to figure out, is there some place where we can actually present information that would help people understand where, you know, where the city is on this issue?
Yeah, I hear where you're coming from, Stan. I think that, I mean, I'm still struck from the last presentation and thinking about the impact of these new fire severity zones overlaid against communities that may or may not have realized that suddenly they're in such a zone.
Okay.
And further that, oh, they're on a cul-de-sac and don't have easy egress or evacuation. And wondering, when did they find this out? Whose job is it to tell them that? So I'm very sympathetic to the notion of tracking different things. At the same time, my own personal sense is that we're not necessarily equipped to take on a task like that. That's not a role of an oversight group like this. On the other hand, I do think that we can ask for the appropriate representatives of staff to come back at such a time as there is an answer to this informational question. Because for me, I see a future in which those zones are going to continue to increase. And our ability to articulate that level of risk, changing risk, to the inhabitants of our city who find themselves in that neighborhood. Our ability to move quickly in that regard and allow people to adjust accordingly and become familiar with whatever their evacuation requirements are going to need to be, is going to be appropriate for the future. Back to the discussion of community wildfire resistance. I mean, I'm still very interested in the topics of grid resilience and microgrids, particularly as they pertain to how do we enable areas of the city to recover quickly from catastrophic events that I, for one, believe the future holds for us. I think there's a very long-term, very complex and very important discussion to be had around the city's role in just that kind of planning and movement toward an entire system that is much more resilient than the one we have at the moment. So speaking personally, I have the energy topic queued up in June in theory, and have been debating how best to, not necessarily bring in a presenter on facts, but to queue up the entire topic so we can, as a group, think about the work plan for 2026 in terms of what we want to do there. So I'm not really answering the question of what do we talk about very well. I want to keep microgrids and grid resilience on the list.
And you're proposing like a resiliency, a recovery topic, is kind of what I get it.
To me, that's what grid
Yeah.
resilience is about.
Yeah.
And just to follow what you said, our role is not to implement any activity, but the actual objective as part of that priority goal is to develop a set of recommendations for city leadership.
We get to help push, if appropriate, or suggest recommendations. You said it better.
Any other thoughts, discussion?
Now that we've thoroughly confused it.
What do you guys want to know?
I wonder if then Stan's, I agree with Stan's request that it would be great to have pieces of what we've been learning more organized and shared with the public in order to get some of this information out. I don't know whether that's already happening. So is our question more of a communication question? If we thought about a recommendation for the city, could we ask the city to communicate some of these pieces that are important to an individual homeowner or a community more clearly in these ways, so that changes in mapping are there, insurance information programs are here, these are the bills that they relate to. some of the kinds of things that Stan was teeing up to try and share that with the public better? Or,
Is
Yeah,
that
better.
is that the focus area topic on how well or to what extent this disparate information is being communicated to the people most affected by it?
what do you mean focus topic? Sorry.
Well, our goal is to select a focus area.
Okay, yes. Yeah, I mean, Stan can say this isn't helpful, but how about if one of those focus areas is how does the city communicate this information to its residents?
Any thoughts on that?
I'll just note, we have many web pages that have a lot of this information. So I think that understanding too, if there are specific pieces of information that you feel like are missing, the AB 2911 constrained parcels map is available through fire rescues. They also have a page for the new proposed very high fire hazard severity zones. Those have not yet gone forward to council. So all of that information, how to learn about it, how to comment on those maps is through fire rescue. But I think certainly if when you're looking at the materials that are on the city's website, you think it's missing something or a one pager, a flyer, something like that would be helpful, particularly when those new fire hazard severity zones are adopted and finalized. I think that type of guidance of what's missing from what's available there and how do we make it more easily accessible, or how do we circulate it better to the community is helpful.
Erica, was that part of your question, is proactive communication?
Yeah, and what occurs to me is that there's a natural linkage here between what we just were doing last time about getting the profile of the committee a little higher and putting some stuff out on LinkedIn. And maybe there are ways to take some little snippets of what we have learned on the websites that exist and put them in a different format. Because for me, the website is got a ton of information there and it's very passive. You don't have to know to go there. Whereas, and LinkedIn is the only social, so I'm not a very good exemplar of this at all, but you know, ways to be a little bit more proactive and get this information out further. So, okay, how much of the city's communication staff can we use for this commission to put our stuff out there and make sure it gets out there? That's not really fair. You guys got enough for this one.
Circle back here.
So I mean, I think all of that sounds good. I was gonna take us a little bit different direction. That I think one of our main deliverables is going to be a report on this topic. And one of the questions we were recommending is when we talk about something, we should ask ourselves, do we have enough information to have a recommendation? Or are there additional presentations, guests, or information needed? With respect to the presentation we just had and the question of do we need to delve into that further? I think we have enough information for now at the state that is. So I'd be comfortable making some sort of motion that's recommending for that final report that the city continue prioritize completion and communication in implementing those bills and return to the board when they have additional draft information. And then I think that kind of helps conclude maybe that specific task and then decide where do we want to go with the rest of this item. So if that's a motion and if there's a second, I'd be happy to make it.
Yeah, that restated in full.
Yeah,
That's on the same page.
so we, that the city continue syncing the hazard mitigation and safety planning.
Continue
Plan?
prioritizing and implementation.
Yeah, well, I said, I think continue to prioritize completion and communication of implementing the fire hazard mapping and related state bills.
Okay, I was getting to with the state bill syncing. So it's not specifically the hazard mitigation and safety plan that they just presented them? It's
I
just
think
all
those are
their
part of it.
Okay, okay. Say it one more time. So the city continued to prioritize.
Prioritize completion and communication.
Yeah.
Was the phrase I came up with.
I just said thanks for.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, the compelling piece of this was under Senate Bill 99, identifying residential developments in hazard areas that lack emergency evacuation routes. It's like, when will we know that? We have to wait until completion of the general plan update in 2026 before this is available information. So I don't know if that's a specific question to be taken back to staff or I hear your recommendation, Eric. I think we're really headed in the right direction to prioritize completion of this work. Perhaps I could amend it by inserting.
Hasn't seconded yet.
We're moving.
Yeah, I think procedurally would need to be seconded before we discussed it.
Before it's amended.
I second Eric's motion.
Session.
Okay, and I was just going to amend it if this is appropriate. To emphasize completion of identifying residential developments that lack emergency evacuation routes. That to me seems to be a very important piece of information that should be known earlier rather than later, publicized earlier rather than later, through whatever mechanics normally exist. But to wait until general plan update.
I defer to the chair of the procedure. I mean, I guess that was my original intent, is to prioritize as I consider SB 99. That identification in one of those state laws. I think, given the city's budget environment, if anything, our role is to help continue to push things that we think are important.
I think you can officially, with the amendment, if we have a second. On the amendment.
So the amendment is that the city continues to prioritize completion and communication of fire hazard mapping with SB 99, AB 747 and other state plans, especially prioritizing communities that lack emergency evacuation routes.
Do you want to add to that and return to the Resiliency Advisory Board with an update, right?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Still being developed.
Second,
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Yeah.
Opposed? The motion to amend as read passes. So go back to the main motion as amended. Any further discussion on that? So, all in favor? Opposed?
Yes.
Okay.
Big and over, big and.
The motion as amended passes. And is there any more discussion on the priority area?
Well, it sounds like we already are looking at kind of one of the goals in June. So not to keep putting it off, but maybe we hear that presentation in June or July. I think if we can't get a meeting in June and then continue to reevaluate.
Mess up our schedule.
It's not unfinished business if we're not certain if we'll be able to have a presentation as of yet. Let's move this on to,
It's one of our main topics, so I think it's worth at least having a few minutes each meeting to talk about, are we on the right track? Where do we want to go?
get a recommendation out of each one, and then you'll have the full report.
Yes. Actually, that's a very good strategy.
Any action we need to take on this? We'll just continue on to. Yeah, all right. Okay, so do we have Dr. Merrifield
We unfortunately lost Dr. Mayfield due to timing. So he messaged and said he's welcome to reschedule and find an alternate time. So Eval, you and I can coordinate with him. We can always do 2 resilience topics for next week's or next month's meeting, and just kind of look at what we have overall. I don't think next month's meeting is as packed agenda wise, at least yet. So we can just have 2 resilience topics next month if that works for him.
Okay.
We could potentially just make that under unfinished business so he can go early.
Or we can move to the top of the agenda, yeah.
Yeah, if we can give them a time certain, be great.
All right. And it'll be further into the season where we have more extreme heat, so.
That's
If
right. Be more relevant.
we're headed to winter, it'd be less relevant. That's right. All right, so we move on to item 9B, which is ad hoc subcommittee report 2025 work plan planning goal #1. That's essentially me. This was a quick update that I've been reaching out to quite a few different organizations, letting them know that we are looking for, we're encouraging people to apply for the vacant seats and encouraging them to help us spread the word. We've received quite a few responses. People have been posting, have been sharing with their membership and other members. Please continue to send me any organizations, and that formatted spreadsheet would be great. As earliest convenience, and that will make it be able to send out those emails and continue filling up Julia's inbox as well by calling it.
Get the word out.
If anyone has any questions about that?
Sure. Have you got any nibbles? Interested, just to know what it is.
I've heard some interest, but haven't had any confirmation of people actually applying. But one thing we want to stress is that it's we're specifically looking for those representing council districts 4, 8, and 9.
They need to be nominated by their council member. I have seen some applications coming in, so we are getting applications, which is great. But in order to fill the seats, we do need the nominations. And our Office of Boards and Commissions does send out a monthly memo to all of the council offices that goes through each of the boards and commissions and what seats are empties on those boards. So Resiliency Advisory Board is part of that.
Are those candidates or those applicants made aware that they should be contacting their council member's office?
Not necessarily through the process.
And the other way around, are council members made aware that someone from the district?
They're aware that applications are coming in, and the Office of Boards and Commissions is coordinating with the council member offices.
Yeah, with some of the context being blank on the columns, do you want us to fill those in too, or? And in the spreadsheet?
Yes, any contacts that you have, and you have access to the Google Drive,
Yeah.
so you can see what
So
those are.
I can edit directly in there, right?
Yeah, it should be
Okay.
fine. Just let me know once you do.
Okay.
Start. Great, so we move on to item 10, which is 10A, and Julie, you had already mentioned that those that the climate action plan strategy 5 presentation is good. Confirmed for May.
Yep.
And biodiverse San Diego is confirmed for July.
Correct.
Confirming order of resilience topics, since we've had musical resilience topics. So next month we have continuation of heat, and then we have Eric's. June is the Erica. June is
Yeah,
Erica.
depending on if there is a June meeting, because I will not be available in July.
Jim, what is Eric's topic?
Good question.
Okay, I'm working on something related to either agriculture or kind of water-based agriculture related.
Those were the main ones to confirm that we're not pestering the wrong person and hey, you have a space speaker yet, so that would be you.
Yes.
Okay. And that's about it. Anything else on future meetings? Right. In that case, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
No, that's what I was trying to do. Yeah. There's some culture thing. So.
Come back or